Hi, and welcome to the darkroom. And the darkroom is where I've set up my scanning. And this episode comes out of a question from a viewer, so thank you very much for that, about my scanning setup. What I have, what I do, how I do it, the kit that's used. So that's the purpose of today's episode. So if you're interested in producing your own film scans, you're in the right place. If you're not, then end it here, because otherwise it's just going to get a bit, So we got other videos coming up and going on location again, so that they may be of interest to people. But I don't want to hold up your day. So, but you're welcome to just let it play and walk away. So thanks very much. Anyway, so here we are today. So the most essential thing you obviously need is a camera with a macro lens. And I happen to use a Sony a7R5 for my commercial work and obviously for the scanning as well. 60 megapixel resolution camera, so it's an excellent camera. And I'm using a 70mm f2.8 DG macro Sigma lens, which is a great lens to use on it and is perfect for the scanning setup. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the kit that's used and the process. Now, the workflow has changed slightly literally in the last week or so, because Capture One have implemented in their standard build of Capture One. So it was in beta, now it's not. It's actually part of Capture One. They've implemented a negative workflow, a scanning workflow, which is fantastic, and it works very, very well indeed. So what we have here is my MacBook Pro tethered to the A7R5. So what we're going to do, we'll first of all go through all the kit and the setup, and then the next part will be the workflow, the conversion, and all that sort of stuff. So, as I said, it's important to have a camera. Any camera will do. Any camera in the last 10, any digital camera in the last 10 years is going to yield fine results. Nothing wrong with that. The critical part, there's two critical parts. That's the lens. You need a really good macro lens, obviously, because you can't use a standard lens. Well, you could with tubes, but you want a macro lens. You really do. And as equally important is the copy stand setup. Now, I'm very lucky and very fortunate to have acquired and have a donkey's years old. It must be 50, 60 years old. Though it doesn't look that old, but nevertheless. A Polaroid copy stand. And it came with lights as well and all that sort of stuff. But the thing about this is, first of all, the pillar and the baseboard are at perfect 90-degree angles to each other. So absolutely solid as a rock. And the yoke of which you attach the camera is just a chunk of metal. It's absolutely solid. And you just you sort of go up and down on the column. The sensor needs to be absolutely in parallel and level with the light box and baseboard. Otherwise, you'll get out of focus areas on the negative, because you're scanning in macro. There's virtually no depth of field, so therefore you have to get it absolutely level, the two places level together. That's critical. What I highly recommend is actually picking up a second-hand enlarger, because obviously the enlarger has a column and a baseboard, and the column and the baseboard are at 90 degrees to each other. And you'd remove the enlarger head from the column and the column and replace it with your camera. Now you can obviously pick up. I think I picked, as it happened, this secondhand. I bought this secondhand, and it came with a load of other stuff as well. But it really equated to maybe 150 quid, something like that. So I recommend that's what you do, is you buy a second-hand enlarger and just remove the head and then set that up as your copy stand. You need to make sure that the copy stand is really, really solid. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to take you through the whole, every piece of kit I use to produce my negative scans. And then the next part will go into the workflow. The first thing you need is a light box. Again, this is a Kaiser product. It's a slim light plano light box. The next thing is the holders. Now, I've actually made my own holders. They are made from PVC plastic, and I cut the aperture and I put black cloth gaffer tape to stop the reflection from the surround. And I've made a 35mm one here, a 645 one, a 6x7, and I've also got a 5.4 one as well. And then on the back, I run 2 pieces of gaffer tape, cloth gaffer tape, so that the plastic is not touching, so I can actually slide the negative freely. You can see on the computer screen, I can slide the negative freely as it goes through, but it's just enough. The actual gaffer tape is sort of the thickness of the film, so that works quite well. Just takes the holder off the face of the light box. And then, very important thing is, this is a Giotto blower, and it's a very, very, very good blower, and is an essential item for when you're scanning. Very important thing, because you don't want to be firing the camera from the shutter button. You need a remote. And I've got this lovely, I think it cost, it's a Harnell, H-A-H-N-E-L, cabled remote. It's a USB, micro USB. It goes straight into the A7R5. And this allows me to effectively trigger, move the negative along and trigger at the same time. So it's a quick process. And this is very, very reliable. It works every time. And then I'm using a Teletool cable. And you need a good USB cable. They're not cheap. I mean, this Teletool's cable here is, 50 quid, something like that, 50, 60 quid. So, and it doesn't deliver power either. It's just a data cable. But you need a good cable anyway to connect the camera to the laptop. Also, I do have white gloves. So what we'll do now, we'll go through the scanning. I'll show you that, the capturing in Capture One, and then we'll go through the conversion in Capture One. So we take our negative out of the bag and give it a blow with the Giotto blower, and also the light box area as well. And just place the negative in. And as you can see on the Capture One, you've got a live view, and you can get your exposure range as well here. So I'm at f8, so if I'm going to keep it f8, but you can alter the shutter speed up and down until you've got the right exposure. So that's 10th of a second all the way. So that's too bright there. So it's about there, I would have thought. Half a second f8, and you've got you've got area in the sky. You can see detail, and in the shadow area as well, you can see detail. And at that point, let's give it another blow with the blower brush. And then you do your capture. It's quite simple, really. Just let the autofocus get the neg, and you get a capture. And there's one. Just slide the neg across, and that's where the little bits of gaffer tape on the holder come in handy, because the holder is not tight to the light box glass, so therefore you don't have a problem then with moving the neg. So there's the next one, and then we'll do this next one here. And go focus and capture. And you can see why the remote's so important, to keep everything stable and sharp. So we'll just take those three negatives now, and we will process them in Capture One. So now we're back in the office at the computer, and we are now going from the scan module of Capture One into the negative module of Capture One. And that's where we'll do the conversion. So let's see what that looks like on the computer now. So as you can see here, we're in the, so this is the modules. You've got library, shape, scan, negative, and refine. So in the shape, the first thing you have to do is crop the image to the actual image itself. If you try and do a conversion without cropping, you get this error message come up. And it says uncropped negative warning, an affected image has no defined crop and thus may have visible fill margins which can cause undesirable results. Now you can choose to show that again, but if I click continue a second, you can see what happens. It's not a great conversion because it's recognized all the areas outside the actual image. So that doesn't look great. So we'll just undo that a second. And if we now go and crop, and we have an unconstrained crop, I want to crop quite tight to the image because I want everything that I captured. So we crop within the image and then apply that crop. And now once we've applied that crop, if I go into the negative part of the module and then I desaturate the image, because it is still an RGB image. It's captured, obviously the Sony A7R5 has captured an RGB image. So I take the saturation all the way down, so we have a true black and white. And then at that point, once I've done that, I then go back to the convert negative button, which is here. Convert selected variants to film negative mode and apply auto levels. And then we get our conversion, which is a good conversion because that's a good starting point. It hasn't blown out any highlights. It hasn't filled any shadows. It's got the most dynamic range out of the negative. And we have a very good starting point now to make adjustments. And then the adjustments can be simply made using the histogram tools here. And in this instance, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to bring up the highlights slightly. I don't want anything lost in the highlights in the sky. And I'm also going to brighten the image as well. So I'll go into the exposure slightly and just brighten it up. Just bring the highlights back so they're not blowing out again. And on the center of the histogram, just play about there a bit. And then bring in the black toe here. So I've got a decent black. And there you have a nice black and white conversion from the negative to the positive. We'll manually crop the remaining images. So we go back into here now. So I'll just quickly do that, and I'll speed through that a second, so I won't say any more. And now I've done each crop individually, I can now apply the black and white conversion, which is this conversion here, using the copy and apply tools. So if I highlight the main image and shift click to get all three images up, and with the main converted image highlighted, I click copy and then apply, and then it applies this conversion to the other three negatives. Now what you can do at this point is go into each one and just check that you haven't blown any highlights. So you go back into the negative, have a look at that histogram. Now I can see in the histogram here on this particular image we're clipping the highlights here, so we just want to take that down a touch to maybe there, and just so onto that one, and then the same on this one. Again, clip the highlights here, you can see. So what we'll do, we'll take the exposure down. It's actually an exposure issue really, and we're about there, and then I'm going to just take up, bring the black in a bit more contrast. And at this point also what we can do, obviously you can put a gradient on it to bring the sky back a bit more if you wanted to. So you could bring a gradient mask here and reduce the highlight in the sky. But ideally, all I'm using Capture One for in this instance is actually to get the conversion and to get as much information as possible out of the negative and the scan. And then I'll take each one of these into Photoshop, and I will make my finite adjustments in Photoshop, and then also do my dust and scratches in Photoshop. But as a workflow, I think this works very well. I think Capture One is a great addition to the Capture One workflow and how I'm doing my scanning. So hopefully this session has been informative about how I do my scanning using in this case it's a Sony a7R5 and a macro lens. In your case it'll be whatever kit you have. But as I said, the key things are good lens, good macro lens, a very good baseboard. It's all 90 degrees to the baseboard, and a good column, and it's rigid and it's solid, and just a good working practice, so you can set it up and do your scans quickly. And this is a good, and the Capture One edition has been great as well, so it's worked out very nicely. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that episode. If you're still with me, thank you very much. And yeah, I think we're out and about again on the next episode, so looking forward to that. And in the meantime, you look after yourselves, take care, and see you in the next episode. Cheerio.